The morning air outside the hospital was cold enough to make people pull their coats tighter. Inside, the waiting area buzzed softly with the sound of pages turning, chairs scraping, and the steady hum of vending machines. Among the crowd of patients and families, a small girl stood quietly near the door holding a stuffed rabbit that looked like it had been loved for a long time. Her shoes were slightly worn, and her little hands gripped the toy as though it was the only thing keeping her brave. Her mother had gone to the pharmacy to collect some medicine. She told her to stay right where she was, to not talk to strangers, and to keep her mask on. The girl nodded, but now that her mother was gone, she felt a bit lost in the sea of people. Every chair seemed taken. She looked around, eyes darting from one row to another, until she noticed a man sitting alone near the big window. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, the kind of clothes her teachers said only important people wore. His hair was neatly combed, his shoes shined, and he had a leather briefcase by his side. He didn't look like someone who came to the hospital often. He was staring at the world outside the window, lost in thought, his expression calm but distant, like someone waiting for something that would never come. The girl hesitated. He looked serious, maybe too serious, but she was tired, her legs aching from standing too long. Gathering courage, she took a few steps forward, the sound of her shoes soft against the floor. She stopped a few feet away and looked up at him. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. The man turned, slightly startled. His gray eyes softened when he saw her, a small, thin girl with pale cheeks and a shy smile. "Can I sit here?" She asked. For a moment, he said nothing. He just blinked, surprised by the tiny voice cutting through his thoughts. Then slowly he nodded. "Of course," he said, moving his briefcase slightly to make room. She sat down carefully, clutching her rabbit close to her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, swinging her legs a little. The man glanced at her again. She looked around 9 or 10, though her face had that fragile look some children have when they've spent too much time in hospitals. Her eyes were wide, curious but tired. He turned his gaze back to the window, but he couldn't help feeling her presence beside him. She hummed softly under her breath, a tune that sounded like something from a lullaby. After a while, she spoke again. "You're here alone, too?" The man turned his head slightly. "Yes," he said. "Just waiting." She nodded like she understood. "I come here a lot," she said, "for checkups. Sometimes I have to stay for a few days. I don't like it, but the nurses are nice." He smiled faintly. "You must be very brave." She shrugged, her small shoulders lifting under her pink jacket. "Mama says I have to be. It's not my fault my heart's broken." The man blinked. "Your heart's broken?" She nodded seriously. "The doctor said it doesn't beat the way it should. They're trying to fix it. I take medicine every day. It makes me sleepy." He didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't used to talking to children, not since his own daughter had passed away years ago. She had been just about this age. The memory flickered across his mind like a shadow, something he rarely allowed himself to feel anymore. The girl looked up at him again. "You look sad," she said suddenly. Her words caught him off guard. "Do I?" She nodded. "Your eyes look like you miss someone." He stared at her, wondering how a child could see that so clearly. "Maybe I do," he admitted softly. She hugged her rabbit tighter. "I miss someone too," she said. "My daddy. He went away when I was little. Mama says he's watching from the stars." The man swallowed. "That's a nice thought," he said quietly. She smiled, proud of her answer. "I think he'd like this rabbit. I call her Daisy. She keeps me company when Mama has to work." He smiled gently. "She looks like a good friend." The girl nodded, then looked toward the hallway where her mother had disappeared. "Mama's been really tired lately. She says everything will be fine, but I can tell she's scared. I wish I could help her." The man followed her gaze. "You're already helping," he said softly. "You're being strong." She tilted her head, considering his words. "Do you have kids?" she asked. He hesitated. "I did," he said finally. "Oh." She paused, as if she understood the weight of that word. "What happened?" He looked down at his hands. "She got very sick," he said quietly. "Like you. The doctors tried everything, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. The girl nodded slowly, her small face serious. "I'm sorry," she said. "Thank you," he murmured. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. The air seemed softer somehow, touched by the quiet understanding that only pain can bring. The girl shifted in her seat. You know, she said suddenly, sometimes when I can't sleep, I draw pictures of the sky. I think if I draw enough stars, maybe I'll find the one my daddy's on. He smiled faintly. That sounds beautiful. I could draw one for you too, she said. Maybe your little girl has a star too. The man blinked, his chest tightening. Maybe she does, he said, his voice rougher than before. The girl smiled brightly, pleased with her idea. Then she started rummaging through her small backpack, pulling out a notebook and a few colored pencils. Here, she said, handing him a small paper covered in stars and a big smiling moon. This one's for you. He took it carefully as though it were something fragile. The stars were drawn unevenly, some too big, some too small, but the care in each line was clear. It's lovely, he said. You can keep it, she said proudly. It'll make you happy when you're sad. He looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something stir inside him, a quiet warmth he thought he'd forgotten. Her mother returned a few minutes later, holding a small paper bag and looking tired. She smiled politely when she saw her daughter sitting beside the man. Thank you for keeping her company, she said softly. She's very polite, the man replied, smiling faintly, and quite brave. The woman smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She's been through a lot, she said. But she never stops talking, the girl giggled. That's true. Her mother laughed lightly, then turned to the man again. I'm sorry if she bothered you. Not at all, he said. She was good company. The woman nodded, grateful. It's hard sometimes, she said quietly. She needs regular treatment. I try to make everything seem normal, but she trailed off, her voice shaking slightly. The man nodded. You're doing a good job, he said. She's lucky to have you. She smiled, eyes glistening. Thank you. That means a lot. The girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mama, this is my new friend. He's sad too. Her mother looked embarrassed. Sweetheart, it's all right, the man interrupted, smiling gently. She's very honest. The woman blushed lightly. She doesn't filter much. The man reached for his briefcase, preparing to leave. I should get going, he said. But thank you for the conversation. The little girl looked up, disappointed. Will you come back? He hesitated, unsure what to say. Maybe, he said finally. She smiled brightly. Then I'll draw you another picture. He chuckled softly. I'd like that. As he stood, he glanced once more at the paper in his hand, the one filled with uneven stars. For some reason it felt heavier than it should, as though it carried meaning far beyond its paper weight. He walked toward the exit, but something made him stop. He turned back, watching the girl laughing softly as her mother helped her put on her coat. The warmth in his chest grew stronger. Outside, the wind brushed against his face, carrying the faint sound of hospital doors closing behind him. For years, he had walked through life in silence, meetings, dinners, polite conversations, all without feeling truly present. But that small voice, that innocent question, "Can I sit here?" had pierced through his solitude in a way he couldn't explain. He got into his car and sat there for a long time, staring at the little paper she had given him. Her handwriting was messy, the stars colored in yellow and silver. At the bottom, in uneven letters, she had written, "Don't be sad. Someone still cares." He felt something sting his eyes. He hadn't cried in years, not even at the funeral, not even when the house grew too quiet. But now, this small act of kindness from a child he'd just met, it broke something open. As he drove away, he found himself thinking about her. About the tired mother, the brave little girl, and the strange peace he'd felt for those few minutes. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe, he thought, some people cross our paths for reasons we can't see yet. That night, he placed the paper on his desk. Between business contracts, reports, and expensive pens, it stood out. A simple reminder that not everything that mattered came with a price tag. He stared at it for a long while before turning off the lamp. Meanwhile, back at their small apartment across town, the girl sat at the table, drawing another picture. This one was of 2 stars, one big, one small, shining side by side. Her mother came over and gently stroked her hair. "Who are those stars?" she asked softly. The girl smiled. "That's me," she said, "and my new friend from the hospital. He's sad. So I made his star bright too." Her mother's heart softened. "That's very kind, sweetheart." The girl nodded, proud. "He said he'll come back." Her mother smiled faintly. "Maybe he will." The little girl looked out the window, the city lights twinkling like tiny stars. She whispered softly as if to the sky, "Good night, Daddy." I think I made a new friend today." And somewhere across the city, the man sat by his window, holding a small paper filled with stars, the same stars that connected two strangers who didn't, yet know how much they would change each other's lives. A few days passed after that, short meeting in the hospital waiting room, but the memory of the little girl stayed in his mind. The sound of her small voice still echoed faintly in his head, the way she said, "Can I sit here?" with such gentle courage. It was strange how such a brief encounter could linger so long, especially for a man who thought he had forgotten what emotions felt like. He sat in his office on the top floor of a tall glass building, surrounded by polished furniture, quiet air, and a view of the city that most people would envy. But all he could see was that small piece of paper with the yellow stars on it. It rested near his computer monitor, untouched since that day. Meetings came and went. His assistant brought him schedules, documents, and calls to approve. He nodded, responded politely, did what he always did, but something inside him had shifted, a quiet ache that reminded him of the warmth he felt in that waiting room. During lunch, he looked down at the city again. The streets were full of people moving quickly, chasing their own worries and deadlines. And somewhere among all of them was that little girl and her mother, trying to hold on to hope. He didn't even know their names, but he remembered the way the mother looked, tired but gentle, holding everything together with quiet strength. That night, when he drove home, he passed by the hospital again. He didn't plan to stop, but when he saw the building lights glowing softly against the dark sky, he pulled into the parking lot and sat there for a while. It wasn't guilt that brought him there. It was curiosity and maybe something deeper. Inside, the corridors were quieter at night. Nurses moved softly. Machines beeped faintly in the distance, and the smell of disinfectant hung in the air. He walked slowly, unsure what he was looking for, until he reached the children's ward. Through the glass, he saw small beds lined up, each with colorful blankets and drawings on the walls. Then, by chance, he saw her again. The little girl was sitting on her bed wearing a pale blue hospital gown, coloring in a notebook. Her mother sat beside her, reading a book, but clearly tired. The girl looked up and smiled when she saw him standing by the door. "You came back," she said softly, her face lighting up. He smiled, a little unsure. "I was nearby," he said. Her mother looked up in surprise, then recognition. "Oh, it's you," she said with a small smile. "The kind man from the waiting room." He nodded. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by." "Of course," the mother said. "She's been talking about you all week." The girl giggled. "I told Mama you were my friend. I drew you another picture." She reached for her bag and handed him another piece of paper. This one showed two stars together, shining brighter than the others. He took it gently. "It's beautiful," he said, touched. Her mother smiled faintly. "She likes to draw when she's nervous. It keeps her calm before tests." He nodded, glancing at the girl. "You're in here for tests?" She nodded bravely. "The doctor said they're checking if my heart's ready for surgery. I don't like needles, but Mama says I'm brave." "You are," he said softly. "Braver than most people I know." Her mother smiled at the floor as though embarrassed by the compliment. "She doesn't complain much," she said, "even when things get hard." They talked for a while, simple, kind conversation that didn't feel forced. He learned that the mother worked 2 jobs, one at a grocery store during the day and another cleaning offices at night. She tried her best to pay for the treatments, but it was always a struggle. Still, she spoke with quiet dignity, never asking for help, only gratitude for the care her daughter received. Before leaving, he asked if they needed anything. Snacks, books, maybe a ride home later. The mother politely refused. "You've already been kind enough," she said. "We don't want to be a burden." He nodded, but inside he felt something twist. He had spent years surrounded by people who took advantage of his money or power. Yet this woman, who clearly needed help, refused to ask for anything. It humbled him in a way he didn't expect. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake thinking about the hospital, the tired look in the mother's eyes and the brave smile on the girl's face. Around midnight he got up, walked to his study and sat at his desk. The paper with the 2 stars was still in his hand. He opened his laptop and searched for information about hospital donations. His company had a charity fund that was barely used, a line item on a balance sheet meant to make the brand look generous. For the first time, he wanted to use it for something real. The next morning, he met with his foundation's director. "I want to sponsor a child's treatment," he said simply. Anonymously. The director looked surprised.
"Any particular case?" he nodded.
"A little girl with a heart condition at City Hospital. Her family's struggling. I'll cover everything: treatment, surgery, recovery." "Understood," the director said, still taken aback. "Should I inform the hospital that it's from the company?" "No," he said firmly. "No names. Just make sure they get the help." When he left the office that day, he felt lighter. For once, his actions weren't about business or image. They were about something real. A week later, when he visited the hospital again, he noticed a difference. The mother seemed less worried. The nurses talked to her kindly about new funding for her daughter's treatment. She looked confused but relieved. When she saw him walking in, she smiled warmly. "You came again?" she said. He smiled back. "I was in the area." Her daughter grinned from her bed. "Mama said someone paid for my surgery." "Isn't that amazing?" He froze for a second but then smiled softly. "That's wonderful," he said. "See? The stars must be watching over you." The girl nodded seriously. "I think maybe my daddy helped from the sky." Her mother chuckled softly, brushing her daughter's hair. "Maybe he did, sweetheart." He sat down by the bed, listening as the girl told him about the doctors and the new paints one of the nurses gave her. Every word she spoke seemed to bring color into the sterile white room. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so at peace just listening to someone talk. The mother stepped out for a moment to speak to a nurse, leaving him and the girl alone. The little one looked at him curiously and said, "You don't smile much, do you?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I guess not," he admitted. "You should," she said. "You look nicer when you smile." He laughed quietly. "I'll try to remember that." She nodded, satisfied. "Promise?" He lifted his hand slightly. "Promise." The mother returned, smiling when she saw her daughter laughing. "I haven't seen her this happy in weeks," she said quietly. "She's strong," he said. "You both are." Her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said, "for being kind to her. Most people just see a sick child and look away." He shook his head. "She's more alive than most adults I know." They talked for a while longer. She told him about their life, how they had moved into a small apartment closer to the hospital, how she worked extra hours just to cover rent. He listened carefully, not as a CEO or a businessman, but simply as a person. When it was time to go, the girl grabbed his hand and pressed something small into his palm. It was a paper heart she had folded herself, with 2 stick figures drawn inside. "That's you and me," she said proudly. He looked at it for a long moment. "It's perfect," he said softly. "Thank you." As he walked out of the hospital, he felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, warmth, hope. For years he had believed his world was finished after losing his wife and child. But somehow that tiny girl had brought a spark of light into his quiet existence. Over the next few weeks, he visited often. Sometimes he brought books, sometimes small gifts like crayons or storybooks. The girl always greeted him with joy, and her mother always thanked him politely. They never asked for anything. They just shared stories, laughter, and moments that felt oddly like family. One afternoon, he arrived to find the girl sitting by the window, painting the sunset with bright colors. Her mother was on the phone nearby, her voice soft and tired. "Look," the girl said, holding up the painting. "It's you and me watching the sunset. I used orange for the sky because it's warm, like when you tell stories." He looked at the picture, feeling his throat tighten. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Her mother hung up the phone and smiled at them. "She's been waiting for you," she said. "She said you're her favorite visitor." He smiled, a little embarrassed. "I'm honored," the girl giggled. "You're funny. I wish you could come every day." Her mother sighed softly. "He's a busy man, sweetheart." The girl frowned. "Too busy for friends?" He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "Not too busy for friends." They spent the evening talking, laughing, and sharing stories. The girl asked endless questions and about his work, the world, the stars. Her curiosity was endless. When she finally grew sleepy, her mother helped her lie down and pulled the blanket over her. As she slept, the mother sat back down beside him. "You don't have to keep coming," she said softly. "You've already done so much." He shook his head. "I don't come out of obligation. I come because I want to." She looked at him curiously, as if trying to understand his reasons. "You remind me of someone," she said quietly. "Someone who's lost a lot but still tries to give." He didn't respond, but his silence said enough. When he left that evening, the hallway felt different, warmer somehow. The nurses nodded at him, smiling, as if they knew something he didn't say out loud. Outside, the night air was cool. He looked up at the stars, the same ones the little girl always talked about, and wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe their loved ones did watch over them, sending small miracles through the most unexpected people. That night, he placed her new painting beside the paper heart on his desk. The room, once cold and quiet, now felt alive with color. He poured himself a cup of tea, sat back, and thought about the strange way life connects people when they need each other most. Somewhere across the city, in a small apartment with peeling walls and a tiny kitchen, the little girl was fast asleep, her rabbit in her arms. Her mother sat by her bed, whispering a quiet prayer of thanks. Not knowing that the man who helped them was the same one who once sat beside them in the waiting room, lost and lonely until a small voice asked the simplest question in the world. "Can I sit here?" And maybe that was how everything started. Not with grand plans or miracles, but with two strangers who shared a chair and found in each other's company the beginning of something that neither of them had realized they were missing: hope. The days turned into weeks, and the quiet friendship between the man and the little girl grew in small, meaningful ways. Each visit to the hospital became something he looked forward to, something that brought him a peace he didn't know he had been missing. For years, his world had been filled with numbers, meetings, and people who spoke in polite tones but never from the heart. Now, each time he sat beside that small hospital bed, he felt alive again. The girl's room was always bright. There were paper stars taped to the walls, colorful drawings hanging near her bed, and a vase of flowers someone had brought days before. The smell of crayons and disinfectant mixed together in the air, oddly comforting. She was usually painting or reading when he arrived, her small face lighting up the moment she saw him walk through the door. "You're late," she would tease. "I had a meeting," he would say with a smile. "You should tell them. Your friend is more important," she'd answer with mock seriousness, and somehow in that hospital room, the walls of his old life began to fade away. He started spending more time with them, sometimes bringing small gifts, nothing fancy, just things he thought would make her smile. A set of watercolor paints, a soft blanket, a puzzle shaped like the moon. The mother always thanked him politely, sometimes too politely, as though she didn't want to owe him anything. One evening, he brought a small plant in a pot. "It's for your window," he told the girl. "It'll grow if you take care of it." She looked at it curiously. "Will it get flowers?" "If you talk to it every day, maybe," he said. She nodded seriously. "Then I'll tell it stories." Her mother laughed softly. "She'll talk it to life if that's what it takes." He looked at the mother, tired still but kind. She worked so hard and yet never complained. Her eyes were often ringed with fatigue, but her smile was gentle, filled with strength that only mothers seem to have. One day, when the girl was taken for a test, the mother and the man sat together in the small waiting lounge outside her ward. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed faintly. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, the mother broke the silence. "You visit her so often," she said quietly. "Most people don't. Friends fade away after the first few months. They say it's too hard to watch." He looked down at his hands. "I lost my family once," he said softly. "I know how it feels to be surrounded by people but still feel completely alone." The woman nodded slowly, understanding. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to pry." "You're not," he said. "It's just something I don't talk about much." She gave him a small, kind smile. "Maybe that's why she likes you so much. She says you understand things without her having to explain them." He felt a quiet warmth at her words. "She's very special," he said. "She reminds me that kindness still exists." The mother looked away, her eyes misty. "Sometimes I forget to believe in that," she whispered. He wanted to say something, anything, to comfort her, but the words stuck in his throat. All he could do was sit beside her in silence, letting the quiet speak for them both. When the girl returned from her test, still groggy but smiling, he helped adjust her blanket. "Did the doctors treat you well?" he asked. "They gave me jelly after," she said proudly. "I told them I was brave," he chuckled. "I believe it." Over the next few weeks, her treatment became more intense. There were days she was too weak to talk, and days she was cheerful again, painting little suns and moons. Through it all, he kept coming. Sometimes they just sat quietly, her small hand resting near his. as they looked out the window together. The mother grew more comfortable around him, though she still carried herself carefully, never wanting to appear as if she was asking for anything. She told him small pieces of their story, how she had once dreamed of being a teacher, how her husband had died in an accident years ago, how she promised herself she would do whatever it took to give her daughter a chance. He listened, never interrupting, never offering pity. He knew from his own life that pity did more harm than good. One afternoon, as the mother went to the hospital cafeteria to buy food, the little girl whispered to him, "Mama works too hard. Sometimes I hear her cry when she thinks I'm asleep." He felt his chest tighten. "She loves you very much," he said gently. "I know," she said, "but I wish I could help her. If I get better, I'll help her work so she can rest." He smiled softly. "You're already helping her," he said. "You're her reason to keep going." She looked up at him with wide eyes. "Do you think so?" "I know so," he said firmly. That night, as he drove home, her words echoed in his mind. He thought about how unfair life could be, how good people often carried the heaviest burdens. He had money more than he could ever spend, but it had never brought him peace. And now, seeing that small family fighting for survival, he felt an ache to do something more. The next morning, he made some quiet calls. Through his company's foundation, he arranged for them to receive a small monthly allowance, disguised as part of the hospital's support program. He told no one. He didn't want credit. He simply wanted them to breathe a little easier. When he visited again, he noticed the difference. The mother seemed lighter, less tense. She had brought her daughter a new set of pajamas and even smiled more easily. "The hospital helped us with some support," she said with a grateful smile. "It means I can stay home a little more." "That's wonderful," he said, keeping his tone casual. "Sometimes I don't understand how kindness finds us," she said softly, "but I'm thankful." He nodded, feeling something heavy in his chest, a mix of guilt and warmth. He didn't want her to ever feel indebted. He just wanted her to have a moment of peace. As the days passed, the little girl's health began to change. Some mornings she looked brighter, laughing with the nurses, and some days she was pale and quiet. Through it all he stayed, sometimes just reading to her in a low, calm voice. She liked when he read stories about stars, dreams, and faraway places. One rainy afternoon, when the world outside was gray and the air smelled of dampness, the mother sat by the window watching the rain slide down the glass. He was there too, sitting across from her. "I used to love the rain," she said softly. "Before all this, before the hospital visits. Now it just makes me worry. Every storm makes me think something bad will happen." "Storms pass," he said quietly. She looked at him. "You really believe that?" He nodded. "Yes, sometimes they take a while, but they always pass." She smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who's waited out a few storms yourself." "I have," he said. "And I learned that even when everything looks dark, there's always someone holding a small light somewhere." Her eyes softened. "You've become that light for her," she said. "And maybe for me too." He didn't know what to say. He simply looked out the window again, the rain blurring the world into soft colors. Over time, the hospital visits became part of his life, a quiet rhythm that gave his days meaning. He started noticing small details about them both. How the mother always tucked her daughter's hair behind her ear, how the girl giggled when the nurses teased her, how they always said thank you for even the smallest things. One evening, as he walked them to the parking lot after an appointment, he saw the old car they used and rusted, barely running. The mother struggled to start the engine, her hands trembling. He stepped closer. "Let me help," he said. "It's all right," she said, quickly embarrassed. He smiled gently. "Please, it's just a car, not a secret." She hesitated, then handed him the keys. He managed to get it started after a few tries. The sound of the engine coughing to life made her sigh with relief. "You've saved the day again," she said with a small laugh. He shrugged. "Just a little luck," the girl giggled from the back seat. "He's like a superhero." Her mother smiled, shaking her head. "More like a very patient friend." When they drove away, he watched the taillights fade into the distance. That night, he called a mechanic he trusted and arranged to have the car repaired quietly. He didn't want them to know. It wasn't about being generous, it was about easing a bit of their struggle. The next week, when the mother found the car fixed, she was completely puzzled. "Someone must have helped," she said in disbelief. The girl grinned. Maybe it was the stars. The man smiled when she told him that later. Yes, he said softly. Maybe it was. Their bond grew stronger with every passing day. He became more than a visitor. He became family. Nurses smiled when they saw him walk in, and even the doctors greeted him with quiet respect. He brought laughter into that small room, and in return they brought life back into his heart. But beneath the laughter, he could sense the fear that lingered in the mother's eyes. The surgery was approaching. It was the big one, the one that could change everything or take everything away. One evening, as he was about to leave, she stopped him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You've been more help than you realize." He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything," she smiled sadly. "You remind me of my husband sometimes. He was quiet too, always helping people without wanting credit." He paused, touched. He must have been a good man. "He was," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You'd have liked him?" "I'm sure I would," he said quietly. They stood in silence for a while, watching her daughter sleep peacefully under the soft light. The machines hummed gently beside her bed, steady and rhythmic. "Do you ever wonder why people meet?" she asked after a while. He looked at her, thinking carefully. "Maybe because we need to," he said. "Even if we don't understand it right away." She nodded as though that made sense. Maybe that's true. That night, as he drove home, he couldn't stop thinking about them. About fate, kindness, and how a small voice in a waiting room had changed everything. He reached his quiet house, walked into his study, and looked at the drawings on his desk. The stars, the paper heart, the paintings, and they filled the room with color. He smiled faintly, realizing that for the first time in years he didn't feel alone. He didn't know what the future held for them, but one thing he knew for certain: he wasn't going to disappear. He would stay by their side, through every storm, until the stars they both believed in finally shone bright again. The day of the surgery came sooner than anyone expected. The hospital felt heavier that morning, filled with quiet footsteps and the low hum of machines. Outside, the sky was pale gray, the kind that made everything feel a little more serious. The little girl was in her bed, dressed in a small hospital gown, her hair tied up neatly by her mother. Her rabbit sat on her lap, worn but loved, just like always. The man stood near the window, watching the light shift slowly across the room. He had arrived early, wanting to be there before they took her in. The mother looked tired, even more than usual, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the blanket around her daughter. "You didn't have to come so early," she said softly, though her voice carried a tone that sounded more like gratitude than complaint. He shook his head. "I wanted to." The little girl smiled faintly from her bed. "You said you'd be here," she whispered. "You kept your promise." "I always keep my promises," he said gently. The nurses came in shortly after, their voices kind but brisk. They explained what would happen, how long it might take, and what to expect. The mother listened carefully, nodding even though her eyes glistened with worry. She held her daughter's hand tightly, refusing to let go until the last moment. Before they wheeled her away, the girl looked at both of them and smiled bravely. "Don't be sad," she said. "I'll be okay. The stars are watching." Her mother's lips trembled as she nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. The stars are watching." He felt his throat tighten but managed to smile back at her. "We'll be right here when you wake up." Then the doors closed behind her and the hallway fell silent except for the sound of footsteps fading down the corridor. The mother stood frozen for a moment before sitting down slowly on one of the chairs outside the operating room. Her hands were shaking as she tried to take a deep breath. He sat beside her quietly. For a long time neither of them spoke. The air felt thick with fear and hope mixed together, too heavy for words. After a while she whispered, "They said it could take hours." He nodded. "We'll wait." She looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "You didn't have to stay. You've already done so much. I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he said softly. "You're not alone in this." Tears slipped down her cheeks and she wiped them quickly, embarrassed. I can't lose her," she whispered. "You won't," he said gently. "She's strong, stronger than anyone I know." The hours passed slowly. Every minute felt longer than the last. Nurses came and went, sometimes giving updates, sometimes saying nothing at all. The mother prayed quietly under her breath. He sat beside her the whole time, silent but steady. like a shadow refusing to move. At one point, she leaned back, exhaustion washing over her. Her eyes closed for a moment and her voice broke softly. "I never told you," she said, "but I know it was you." He turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "The bills," she whispered. "The help from the foundation, the repairs on my car, the extra support from the hospital. I tried to ask the staff, but no one would tell me. Then I realized the truth." He hesitated, unsure of what to say. "I didn't want you to feel like a charity case," she interrupted softly. I didn't know how to thank you." He looked down at the floor. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because I wanted to help. You've both given me something I didn't even know I was missing." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, his voice quiet but steady. "After my wife and daughter passed away, I shut everything out. I went to work, came home, and repeated the same day again and again. I stopped feeling anything. But when I met your daughter in that waiting room, something changed. She reminded me of what kindness looks like, of what hope feels like." The mother's eyes softened. "You've been carrying that pain alone all this time?" He nodded. "For years. I thought I didn't deserve to feel anything anymore. But your daughter, she brought light back into my life. You both did." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression full of understanding. "Maybe we were meant to meet," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "Maybe we were." They fell silent again, each lost in thought. Hours turned into more hours. The waiting room lights buzzed softly overhead. People came and went, but they stayed there. Two souls bound by fear, by hope, and by something neither of them could name. Finally, a doctor appeared at the end of the hall. Both of them stood instantly. The mother's hands clutched her chest, her heart pounding. The doctor's expression was calm, his voice steady. "The surgery went well," he said. "She's stable." It was long, but she did wonderfully. The mother let out a cry, half relief, half disbelief, and covered her face with her hands. Tears poured down her cheeks as she whispered "thank you" over and over. He stood beside her, a wave of relief washing through him so deeply it almost made his knees weak. The doctor smiled at them both. "She'll be in recovery for a while, but you can see her soon." "Thank you," the man said, his voice rough when they finally saw her. She was pale and small under the blankets, but breathing steadily. Her tiny hand rested near her chest, connected to wires and tubes. The mother brushed a tear from her face and kissed her forehead gently. "She did it," she whispered. He stood at the foot of the bed, looking at her with quiet awe. "She's stronger than both of us," he said softly. The mother smiled through her tears. "She always has been." Over the next few days, he visited every morning and evening. Sometimes he brought her flowers, sometimes small gifts, sometimes nothing but his presence. The girl would smile weakly when she saw him, her voice still soft from the medication. "You came again," she'd whisper. "Of course," he'd reply. "I couldn't miss seeing my favorite artist." She would smile faintly and close her eyes again, drifting back to sleep. One afternoon, as the mother sat beside her daughter, she turned to him. "She keeps asking when she can paint again," she said quietly. "It's the first thing she wants to do when she's strong enough." He smiled. "Then we'll get her the biggest set of paints we can find." The mother laughed softly. "You don't need to do that." "I want to," he said. "Let me." She looked at him for a moment and nodded. "You really do care about her, don't you?" "I do," he admitted. "More than I expected to." For a brief second, their eyes met and something passed between them, something quiet and unspoken. Not romance exactly, but a deep connection born of shared pain and healing. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the girl began to recover. Her cheeks grew rosier, her laughter returned, and her strength came back little by little. Nurses stopped by just to see her smile. Doctors spoke proudly of her progress. One afternoon, when the sunlight poured through the window and the room smelled faintly of flowers, she looked at the man and said, "I had a dream when I was sleeping after the surgery." "Oh?" he asked, smiling. "What kind of dream?" "I saw the stars," she said. "They were really close. My daddy was there, and he said I have to stay a little longer because someone still needs me here." The man blinked, his throat tightening. "Someone still needs you?" She nodded. "He said you still get sad sometimes, but if I stay, you'll smile more." He felt his chest ache in that strange, bittersweet way that comes only from love that has no explanation. He reached out and gently touched her hand. "Then I'm glad you're staying," he said softly. When he looked up, her mother was watching him with tears in her eyes. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Thank you." He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you." A few days later, the doctor told them she could go home soon. The room filled with excitement and relief. The mother began packing her things while the girl made plans about all the drawings she would make once she was back home. As they got ready to leave, the girl handed him another paper. It was a simple drawing, 3 stars close together surrounded by light. "This time," she said proudly, "it's all of us." He smiled, his eyes glistening. "I'll treasure it forever," he said. When they left the hospital, the air outside was warm and golden. The sun was setting behind the city buildings, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. The girl walked between them, holding both their hands. "See?" she said. "The stars aren't just in the sky. They follow us." The mother looked down at her daughter, then at the man. "I think she's right," she said softly. He smiled. "I think so too." They walked slowly toward the parking lot, none of them in a hurry. For once, life didn't feel rushed. It felt calm, grounded, and full of meaning. That evening, he sat alone in his house, holding the new drawing in his hands. The 3 stars seemed to glow under the light. He thought about everything that had happened: the chance meeting, the laughter, the fear, the hope, and the way it had all led to this moment. He placed the drawing on his desk beside the others. The papers told a story, a journey from darkness to light, from loss to connection. And he realized that somewhere along the way his empty house had stopped feeling so empty. Some people spend their lives searching for miracles, he thought. But sometimes miracles walk up to you in a hospital waiting room and ask with the smallest voice in the world, "Can I sit here?" He smiled to himself, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, something he hadn't done in years. Outside, the stars began to appear one by one, shining gently through the night sky. He looked up at them and whispered softly, "Thank you." And maybe, somewhere far away, one of those stars shimmered just a little brighter in return. Weeks passed after the little girl came home from the hospital. Her body was still weak, but her spirit had never been brighter. Each morning, sunlight filled their small apartment, and the air carried a feeling of peace that hadn't been there before. The girl liked to sit near the window with her sketchbook, drawing everything she could see: birds, trees, the sky, even the shadow of her mother as she moved around the kitchen. The mother would often stop and watch her, smiling softly. There had been so many nights she feared this moment would never come. Now hearing her daughter hum as she drew felt like a gift. Every few days the man came by to visit. He always brought something small: a book, a box of paints, a basket of fruit. But what mattered most wasn't the gifts. It was how easily laughter filled the room when he was there. He had a way of turning ordinary moments into something special. One afternoon, he knocked on their door carrying a canvas nearly as big as the girl herself. She gasped in delight when she saw it. "For you," he said, smiling. "So you can paint something big, something that takes both hands." Her eyes sparkled. "Can I paint all of us on it?" He nodded. "That sounds perfect." The mother laughed softly. "You're spoiling her," she said, but her voice held only warmth. He looked at her with a gentle smile. "She deserves to feel happy again. You both do." They spent that afternoon together. The girl painted while they talked quietly over tea. Sometimes the girl would interrupt to show them her progress. By the end of the day, there were 3 figures on the canvas: a woman, a man, and a little girl standing under a sky full of stars. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of heart. When she was done, she turned to them proudly. "Now we'll never forget," she said. The man smiled, touched by her words. "No, we won't." As the weeks turned into months, the girl's strength returned little by little. She began going for short walks outside, her mother always close by. Sometimes the man joined them, and the 3 of them would stroll through the nearby park. People who passed by might have thought they were a small family. The way they walked together, the way the girl held their hands, one on each side. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the park lights began to glow, the girl stopped suddenly and looked up. "Do you think the stars can see us from here?" she asked. Her mother smiled. "I think they always can." The man looked up too, his eyes thoughtful. "I think they watch over us every day," he said. The girl nodded, satisfied. "Then they must be happy now," she said softly. After that day, life began to settle into a gentle rhythm. The mother found a new job that allowed her to spend more time at home. The man often helped when he could, offering advice or making calls that opened doors she could never have reached alone. He never did it for recognition. He simply cared. But what surprised him most was how much he had changed. The loneliness that once filled his house had been replaced by laughter and light. The sound of silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. He found himself smiling more, even at small things. The smell of fresh coffee, the sound of rain, the way the girls' laughter echoed down the hall. Sometimes he would catch himself thinking about how strange life was. How one small moment, a question asked by a little girl in a waiting room, had rewritten everything he thought he knew about himself. One morning, he woke early and drove to a nearby park with a small wooden bench overlooking the lake. He had asked for it to be built through his company's charity program. On it was a small brass plaque that read, "For those who bring light back into the world." When the mother and daughter arrived later that day, he led them to it. The girl tilted her head as she read the words aloud. "It's beautiful," she said. The mother touched the plaque gently. "You did this?" He nodded. "It felt right," he said simply. They sat together on the bench, watching the water shimmer under the afternoon sun. The girl leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, her eyes dreamy. "This feels like a place where wishes come true," she said softly. The man looked at her and smiled. "Maybe it is." For a long moment they sat there in comfortable silence, just breathing in the quiet beauty of the day. Later that evening, he walked them home and stayed for dinner. The mother cooked something simple, but the warmth in the room made it feel like a feast. The girl talked endlessly about her plans. She wanted to go back to school soon. She wanted to paint the sky. She wanted to make a card for the nurses who had helped her. At one point, the mother looked at the man and smiled. "You've become part of our lives," she said softly. "It's strange to think how it all began." He smiled too. "A little girl with a stuffed rabbit asked me if she could sit beside me," he said. "That was the best question I've ever been asked." They laughed together, but there was emotion behind it, a deep sense of gratitude that words could never fully express. That night, after dinner, the girl fell asleep on the couch while drawing. The man gently lifted her sketchbook and saw that she had drawn another picture, this one of 3 people sitting on a bench under a sky filled with stars. At the bottom, in her uneven handwriting, she had written, "Family." He stared at the word for a long time. It filled him with warmth, but also a quiet ache, the kind that comes from knowing something precious had returned to his life. The mother came to stand beside him, her voice soft. "She sees you that way," she said. "And honestly, so do I." He looked at her surprised. "You do?" She nodded. "You've given us more than help. You've given us hope." "I haven't seen her this happy in years." He smiled faintly. "You've given me the same thing," he said quietly. They didn't need to say anything more. The moment itself was enough. As months went by, the girl grew stronger. She started school again, made new friends, and began entering small art competitions. Each time she painted, she made sure to include a tiny star somewhere in her work. "For good luck," she'd say. The man attended every one of her little exhibitions, always standing quietly in the back, proud beyond words. The mother often joined him, and over time, what had started as gratitude turned into something deeper, a bond built on kindness, trust, and shared healing. One afternoon, as the 3 of them sat outside painting together, the girl looked up with a grin. "You know," she said, "when I grow up, I want to help people like you do." He laughed softly. "You already do," he said. She smiled shyly. "Maybe, but I want to make a big difference like you. You helped me when you didn't even know me." He looked at her seriously. "You helped me first," he said. "You reminded me what it means to care again." Her mother watched them both, her heart full. She couldn't have imagined this life a year ago. Laughter, safety, love. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. Later that evening, as they packed up their art supplies, the girl suddenly said, "I think the stars are happy now." Her mother smiled. "Why's that?" "Because we are," she said simply. The man looked up at the darkening sky, the first stars beginning to appear. He thought about his late wife, about the years of emptiness, about the little girl who had walked into his life when he least expected it. Maybe, he thought, the stars really did watch over people. guiding them toward the light when they'd forgotten how to find it. That night, after dropping them off, he went home and placed the girl's latest painting on his living room wall. The house no longer felt quiet or cold. It felt alive, full of color, laughter, and the kind of peace he never thought he'd find again.